a look of open defiance written across his face. Reese's arms were outstretched upon the ground. Under his left hand, protruding just past the edge of his palm, was the corner of a cartridge that looked identical to the one Andy had thrown into his desk drawer some short time previously. Andy's heart sank. The cartridge was not identical to the one he had discarded. A triple dose, Reese had told him. The stranger started to speak again in harsh, barking tones. Reese broke in, yelling something about merchandise being stolen from him. Andy didn't really hear, nor did he care to. His eyes were fixed upon the corner of the cartridge that was almost concealed under Reese's hand. Suddenly, and without warning, the stranger lunged forward and, grabbing Reese roughly by his shirt, lifted him and hurtled him against the hard corridor wall. The stranger's attention was now completely focused on Reese, and Andy's escape path was clear. Andy was close to taking it, probably would have had the sudden attack upon Reese not sent the cartridge hurtling away from the pair and back to Andy's original position. The sight of the triple-dose cartridge flung clear of both men was too much for Andy to resist. Immediately, his eyes lit up, and he turned to the cartridge. The yelling between Reese and the stranger was now nothing more than an indiscriminate groan at the back of his consciousness. Andy's heart was beating fast, the sound filling his ears as he slowly walked towards the cartridge. Every step seemed to draw out as the cartridge grew closer, gradually filling his whole field of vision as he leaned towards it, wrapping his shaking fingers around its cold, satisfying form. It was heavy, a lot heavier than any cartridge Andy had held before. Greedily, he thrust out his right arm, roughly pressing down upon the mechanical cartridge unit. The flat top immediately opened, revealing metal plastics and whirring. Without looking, he pressed the cartridge into his arm and pushed shut the top of the unit. Almost immediately, his body began to relax and fill with a sensation of absolute joy. Smiling, Andy looked down at the working unit on his arm. He was ready to make his discreet exit now. Before he had taken more than 3 steps back towards his escape route, his right arm began to shake again, though this time it was no small quivering, but the beginnings of an uncontrollable spasm. Andy looked down upon his arm with a growing sensation of horror that cut through the ecstatic hysteria that had begun to encompass his body. A thin yellow liquid started to escape from the edges of his cartridge loader, dripping slowly from his arms onto the deck plating below. Panic welled up in Andy's gut as he reached forward with a hand, vainly pressing the top of the unit to eject the cartridge. A piercing, grating sound exploded through his ears at that moment, and he dropped painfully to his knees, both of his hands moving instinctively towards his ears, a mangled scream escaping his lips. At the sound of the cry, the stranger immediately turned his head towards Andy. Seeing the thin yellow liquid starting to drip out of his arm, the stranger turned again towards Reese, his face a mask of pure rage. "You gave the cell to him?" "No. He must have stolen..." Before Reese could finish, the stranger threw a punch into his face, sending Reese towards the ground unconscious. Pivoting away from Reese's fallen figure, the stranger crossed the distance between himself and Andy in 2 long strides, immediately pulling him upright. Roughly, the stranger held open each of Andy's eyelids in turn, watching as the pupils reacted wildly. Vainly, the stranger pressed against the surface of Andy's cartridge unit, ignoring the long stream of foaming saliva that was now escaping from his mouth. The stranger hooked one of Andy's arms over his shoulder and started to walk him at as quick a pace as he could manage away from Reese's unconscious body. The claustrophobic corridors of the Sonari's outer service areas started to give way to much wider, cyclical corridors. They were nearing the port where the stranger's ship was docked. Reese had been unconscious before he hit the deck plating, but he was not unconscious for long. Groggily, he pulled himself back to his feet, his head swaying and his stomach churning as he did so. Absently, he felt his pockets for the missing cell, only vaguely remembering Andy's piercing scream before jail had knocked him out. The cell, of course, was not there. But sealed in the back of his jacket was a small rapid-fire pistol. Reaching around his back, Reese took out the weapon and started down the corridor, which jail had come from. The corridor stank vaguely of the cell discharge that had erupted from Andy's arm. The poor fool hadn't a clue what he had put in his cartridge loader, and truthfully, Reese didn't care. Another trace attic and another backwoods outpost, they meant little to him, though he liked to foster other ideas. As the corridors started to widen and branch off at intersections, Reese continued to charge forward, following the distinctive stench of cell. As Reese's head cleared, anger and rage replaced the foggy sensation that had preceded it. How dare jail come after him after all that had happened? No cell, no cartridge, was worth the time and money that fool must have spent on tracking him. Still, it didn't matter too much. The stench of cell was getting stronger. As Reese approached a branch in the corridor system that led directly to an array of docking ports, he slowed and raised his gun. Gently, he raised his body against the back of the corridor and readied himself to swing out. Since he had inserted the cartridge into his arm, no coherent thought had passed through Andy's mind. Blasting red and black lights, letters and numbers, symbols and images had all exploded in his mind in a cacophony of light and sound. Andy knew he was moving, that his legs were working under him, that his arm was wrapped around someone, that there was a strong, unfamiliar smell. Even the initial euphoria of the cartridge insert was gone, leaving only a fast, disappearing memory. A blast of wind struck Andy's face, stirring him back to partial consciousness. His eyes opened reluctantly, admitting only a little light. Although he could no longer see the letters, symbols, and numbers when his eyes opened, he was still aware of them pounding through the back of his mind, always on the edge of consciousness. He looked to his right, watching through half-glazed eyes as the stranger worked a manual pump to open the heavy door to the small ship. As the door slid open, a blast of stale air hit Andy, making him retch painfully. The stranger regarded Andy only briefly before marching him inside the ship. If the scenario was claustrophobic, it was at the very least well-maintained. The same could not be said for the ship Andy was being pulled into. Once through the featureless airlock, he felt himself being laid down upon an old grated floorway. Above him, wires and cables hung from the roof in large knotted bundles, a few odd ones sparking suspiciously. The view was blocked promptly as the stranger leaned over Andy, his own partially spiked hair now starting to fall down over his eyes.
"What's your name?"
the stranger said in clear, neutral tones.
"What's your name?"
Andy. The word was labored, but at least he was able to speak. The images were pounding through the back of Andy's mind were beginning to clear. He could not understand them, not exactly, but he did understand that he had been uploaded. What the hell was that? It wasn't a hit.
It's called Cell, Andy, and it was never meant to be taken by you.
Really? Andy coughed and sputtered as he spoke. Who was supposed to take it?
I was.
And who are you?
My name's Jail.
What's happening to me? Andy struggled out after a pause.
You're reacting to the cell. I need to get that cartridge out of you, or it will probably kill you.
Andy's mind exploded again, and colors blocked his vision briefly before it returned. A strong, slightly foul stench reached his nostrils. Following the smell, he tilted his head to look at his right arm, now covered in a yellow pus that was hardening around the edges of his cartridge loader. Jail was doing the same thing, his attention focused upon the locked unit. What the hell is a cell? Why can I see colors? What's happening to me? Andy finally blurted out in a near sob.
Never mind, Andy. Suffice it to say that what the cell is putting in your head, I need in mine.
Why? Are you addicted? Jail chuckled slightly at this, though there was no humor in his laugh. Once again he pressed hopelessly upon Andy's cartridge unit, yielding no results.